Good afternoon, my dear students. Today we will interact about William Wordsworth, who is preeminently known as the poet of nature, the worshipper of nature, the preacher of nature, the lover of nature. He loved the nature in all aspects. William Wordsworth was born on April 7th, 1770, in Cockermouth, Cumberland, England. Wordsworth's mother died when he was only 7 years old, and he became an orphan at the age of 13. Despite these losses, he did well at Hawkshead Grammar School, where he wrote his first poetry and went on to study at Cambridge University. He did not excel there but managed to graduate in 1791. William Wordsworth had visited France in 1790 in the midst of French Revolution. He was very much inspired by and was a supporter of the new government's republican ideals. On a return trip to France the next year, he fell in love with Annette Vallon, who became pregnant. However, the declarations of war between England and France in 1793 separated both of them. Allende, Vallon, and William Wordsworth were separated due to war. However, the declarations of war between England and France in 1793 separated both of them. Left adrift and without income in England, William Wordsworth was influenced by radicals such as William Godwin. In 1795, William Wordsworth received an inheritance that allowed him to live with his sister Dorothy. That same year, Wordsworth met Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The two became friends and together worked on radical ballads. In 1798, the volume contained poems such as Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey and helped Romanticism take hold in English poetry. And Romanticism means an addition of strangeness to beauty. The same year, the Lyrical Ballads was published. Wordsworth began writing the Prelude, an epic autobiographical poem that he would revise throughout his life. It was published posthumously in 1850. While working on the Prelude, Wordsworth produced other poetry such as Lucy. 3 years a grave in sun and sour, the nature said a lovelier flower on the earth was never sown. She shall be mine, and I'll make a lady of my own. Nature is a teacher whose wisdom we can learn if we will, and without which human life is in vain and incomplete. He wrote in Table's Turn, one impulse from a vernal wood may teach you more of man, of moral evil and good, than all the sages can. While working on the Prelude, Wordsworth produced other poetry such as Lucy. He also wrote a preface to the second edition of Lyrical Ballads. It describes the poetry as being inspired by powerful emotions. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility. It described his poetry as being inspired by powerful emotions and would come to be seen as declaration of romantic principles. Thou nothing can bring back the hour of the splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, from intimations of immortality, from recollections of early childhood. In 1802, a temporary lull in fighting between England and France meant that Wordsworth was able to see Annette Vallon and their daughter Caroline. After returning to England, he married Mary Hutchinson, who gave birth to the first of their 5 children in 1803. Wordsworth was also still writing poetry, including the famous I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud and Ode Intimations of Immortality. He grew older. Wordsworth began to reject radicalism in 1830. He was named as a distributor of the stamps and moved his family a new home in the Lake District. By 1818, Wordsworth was an ardent supporter of the conservative Tories. In 1843, Wordsworth became England's poet laureate, a position he held for the rest of his life. At the age of 80, he died on April 23rd, 1850, at home in Ridal Mount, Westmoreland, England. So today we will discuss about his poem I Wandered Only as a Cloud or the Daffodils. So we'll discuss about the daffodils. What he says in the poem, The Daffodils. This poem describes his definition of poetry. Poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility. My dear students, listen and understand how nicely, beautifully, melodiously he has composed this poem. I I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Besides the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their beds in sprightly dance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves besides them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. In such a jocund company, I gazed and gazed. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the snow to me had brought. For oft, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they means golden daffodils. They flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart in pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils, and dances with the daffodils. So, my dear student, this is wonderful poem written by William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth, as we know, he is a worshipper of nature. He loves nature, he worships the nature, he is an ardent devotee of nature. Nature is a living being to him. He loves to live in close assonance with nature. And that is what he says. Nature is a teacher whose wisdom we can learn if we will, and without which human life is in vain and incomplete. He loves to live in close resonance with nature, the serene, the sublime, the silent, the super surrounding in the countryside distress him. The poem in question reveals his great attachment to nature, the beauty and splendor of the golden daffodils of those flowers arrest his attention. These are the golden daffodils, or the 10,000 peoples working for the French Revolution. Or what are they? Who are they? He shares the spirit of joy running through nature. It is a grand feast of beauty. He enjoys it to his heart's content. He also keeps the impression alive in the core of his heart as an undying source of joy and inspiration. Thanks to me. Thanks to the human heart by which we live. To me, the meanest flower that blows can give thoughts that lie too deep for tears. My dear students, this poem, The Daffodils of William Wordsworth, is a fine lyric. You can sing it, it's a song. While wandering in the countryside, the poet saw a large number of golden daffodils besides the lake. They were dancing in the breeze. The poet was deeply moved by their joy and beauty. Are they really the flowers? or they are something else, something more? Who are they? The impression was kept alive in the core of his heart. Hence, the title of this poem, The Daffodils, is exact. The poet William Wordsworth, wandering like a cloud, floating above hills and valleys, he encountered a field of golden daffodils beside a lake. The dancing, fluttering flowers stretched endlessly along the shore, and through the waves of the lake danced beside the flowers. The daffodils outdid the water in the glee. The speaker says that a poet could not help but be happy in such a joyous and merry-making company of these flowers. He says that he stared and stared but did not realize what wealth the scene would bring him. For now, whenever he feels vacant or in pensive mood, the memory flashes upon his heart, and his heart filled with pleasure. That is what he feels, that this is the bliss of my solitude. And his heart fills with pleasure and starts dancing with those golden daffodils. This poem is one of the loveliest and the most famous in the Wordsworth's canon. Revisits the familiar subjects of nature and memory, this time with a particularly simple, spare musical eloquence. The poet is extremely simple, depicting the poet's wandering and his discovering of a field of daffodils by a lake, the memory of which pleases him and comforts him when he is lonely, bored, or restless. The characterizations of the sudden occurrence of a memory, the daffodils flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, is the psychological acute, but the poem's main brilliance lies in the reverse personifications of its early stanzas. The speaker is metaphorically compared to a natural high, and the daffodils are continually personified as human beings, dancing and tossing their heads in a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. This technique implies an inherent unity between man and nature, making it one of the Wordsworth's most basic and effective methods for instilling in the reader the feeling the poet so often describes himself as experiencing. William Wordsworth's poem, The Daffodils, which was written in 1802 and first published in 1807, celebrates the beauty of nature to such an extent that for the poet it is not only beauty but bliss of solitude. It is for him a source of inspiration, motivation, love, affection, gratitude, worship, adoration. The poem is a romantic poem that is based on the principles that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling and emotions recollected in tranquility. And emotions recollected in tranquility. I wandered lonely as a cloud. मैं अकेला ही बादलों की तरह ऐसे ही भटक रहा था. I wandered lonely as a cloud. That floats on a high over वेल्स एंड हिल्स, जो ऊंची ऊंची पहाड़ियों पर घाटियों के ऊपर दौड़ते रहते हैं, उन बादलों की तरह मैं भी अपने बचपन में ऐसे ही घूम रहा था. When all at once I saw a crowd, I saw a lot of people moving around besides that lake. They were standing beneath the trees. The same way the golden daffodils were there. When all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Besides the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. The air was blowing. The breeze, the sweet air was blowing. And the poet was enjoying near the lake. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line. They were looking like that this line will never end. Infinitive line. Infinite. अनंत लाइन कतार में खड़े हुए लग रहे थे. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance. What a hyperbole. अतिशयोक्ति अलंकार का प्रयोग. Nobody can see 10,000 at a glance. But the poet is saying, 10,000 saw I at a glance. There may be a maximum 10,000 people or the flowers. Tossing their heads in sprightly dance, they were dancing, enjoying, merrymaking. The waves besides them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in the glee. A poet means William Wordsworth could not but be gay, but he could be only happy and enjoy in such a jocund company, in such a happy, merry-making company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth they show to me had brought. Which treasure they have brought to me, I don't know. But in the poem The Solitary Pool also we see, I listened motionless and still, and as I mounted up the hill, the music in my heart I poured, long after it was heard no more. The same way here he says, for oft when on my couch do I lie, that flashes on my inward eye. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, the flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils and dances with the daffodils. My dear students, now the questions and answer. The questions may be that when on my couch do I lie? For oft when on my couch do I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, the flash upon that inward eye. What flash upon that inward eye of the poet? Answer, golden daffodils. Who wrote the poem The Daffodils? The poem Daffodils was written by William Wordsworth. When was the poem Daffodils written? It was written in 1802. When was the poem The Golden Daffodils? When was the poem The Daffodils published? The poem The Daffodils was published in 1807. The poem The Daffodils was published in which book? It was published in the Lyrical Ballad. Who said, a host of golden daffodils besides the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Name the poem and the poet. The Daffodils, poem written by William Wordsworth. They flash upon that inward eye. What flash upon the inward eye? The daffodils flash upon the inward eye. Which is the bliss of solitude? What is the bliss of the solitude? The dancing and fluttering of the flowers, or enjoyment or merry-making situations of the people for the French Revolution enables the poets to be happy or feel blessed and bliss in the solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. What it signifies? It signifies and justifies the definitions of poetry of the poet William Wordsworth, emotion, study, collected and tranquility. Because he wrote, for oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, the flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils and dances with the daffodils. Which figures of speech has been used here? 10,000 Isa at a glance. The figure of speech used here, the 10,000 Isa at a glance, is hyperbole, Atishokti Alankar. So, my dear students, this three stanza, the first three stanza deals with the descriptions of the nature, whereas the last stanza is the recollections of the poet's experience. Another important romantic element is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings in simple and ordinary language. This was the revolution brought about by the Romantic movement. Once the poet was aimlessly walking by the side of the lake. In his lonely condition, he could be compared to a cloud floating in the sky over hills and valley. By comparing himself with the cloud, he vividly shows his closeness to nature. All at once, he saw a large number of golden daffodils growing under the trees on the bank of the lake. A light breeze was blowing, and the daffodils moved gently and danced merrily in the breeze. The daffodils grew along the bank of the lake in the line that extended as far as the poet's eye could reach. They looked like a continuous line of stars shining in the Milky Way. The flowers were so many that the poet imagined he could have seen at least 10,000 of them at a glance. They were tossing their hats in merry dance, merry making. The waves in the lake were dancing, but the daffodils excelled in dancing waves in happiness, in merry making, in making joy. It was quite natural for William Wordsworth to feel happy in such a delightful company. Not only William Wordsworth, everybody will feel happy or delighted in the company of such flowers or in such a mood. The beautiful sight filled the poet with a great joy, and he kept gazing and gazing and gazing the flowers for a long time. At the time, he did not, however, realize how valuable this scene was. This scene would prove to him in the years to come. Later, whenever the poet lay on his couch in a sad or thoughtful mood, the daffodils would flash in his imagination, on his heart. He will feel their freshness and their sprightly dance. He acknowledged that one of the greatest blessings that solitude can offer is that memories can be easily and vividly revived. The memory of the daffodils would immediately fill his heart with pleasure, and he would begin to dance along with the flowers. My dear student, the poet to today's date has not been able to forget the beautiful experience that he had near the lake with the dancing daffodils, and the daffodils have made the poet immortal because we are remembering him even today. We are learning his poem today. We are learning about the daffodils and citing the examples and inferences from the poem and trying to understand why the 10,000 at a glance. The 10,000s were the flowers or the man and the women agitating for the freedom. Whenever he lies down for taking a rest, or whenever he is in vacant or in pensive mood, the memory of the daffodils flashes in his mind. And then the poet's mind starts with dancing along with the daffodils, as the sheer memory of them is enough to fill his heart with ecstasy. चिरानंद की स्थिति में पहुंच जाते हैं कवि महोदय. The poem Daffodils in this way is not only a description of the natural beauty but also a celebration of the fact that nature is always a source of inspiration for people. As I told you earlier, nature is a teacher whose wisdom we can learn if we will, and without which human life is in vain and incomplete. Clouds of these banner leaves come forth and see into the nature. Look how the linnet sings, how the throstle sings, how beautiful the scene is. And if you read the Chintan Abbey, you will come to know 5 years have gone, 5 years have passed, and still I see the same. The poet metaphorically compares himself to a natural object, a cloud, and the beautiful daffodils are repeatedly personified as human beings dancing and tossing their hats in a crowd, a host. This use of metaphor indicates the inseparable relationship between human and nature. The nature is a teacher whose wisdom we can learn if we will, and without which human life is very incomplete. The tone of this poem is typically Wordsworthian. It beautifully depicts nature at its best forms and embraces her grace to the apex. The poet is successful at projecting his extraordinary delight in understanding and exploring commonplace things. The daffodils are common for the people, but his poetic mind and eyes find a place in those graceful daffodils. The poem comprises 4 stanzas, and each stanza had 6 lines. The rhyme scheme is A, B, C, and there is the use of alliterations and assonance. The poet has used simile in the title of the poem and the second stanza. Daffodils are animated as dancings and further personified as sprightly. Metaphors like inward eye and the heart can be found in the poem. The language is very simple for the common people. It is used for the poor people, and everybody can understand this language. The language thus is very simple in this poem. There are 8 syllables in each line, and it has iambic tetrameter, and we find that the use of hyperbole figures of speech 10,000 I say at a glance is also used. At last, I would like to say that this poem justifies William Wordsworth's definitions of poetry. Also, the poetry is the emotions are collected in tranquility. Thank you very much to all of you, my dear students. Thanks a lot.